All right, so yesterday we got some absolutely wild news on the 2024 election because the Colorado Supreme Court made a ruling 4-3 that Donald Trump is now disqualified from being on the Colorado ballot for the 2024 election because of what he did on January 6th and leading up to it, basically trying to keep himself in power, knowing that he lost the 2024 or the 2020 election to Joe Biden. So let's go ahead and read some of this here directly from their ruling. They say the sum of these parts is this: President Trump is disqualified from holding the office of president. Under Section 3, because he is disqualified, it would be a wrongful act under the election code for the secretary to even list him as a candidate on the presidential primary ballot. So this is more than even just being on the ballot. This is saying, like, it is unconstitutional for Trump to even be allowed to be the president. And we're going to circle back around to exactly what it says in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and I'll give you my thoughts on that here in a minute. But they say, we do not reach these conclusions lightly. We are mindful of the magnitude and the weight of the questions now before us. We are likewise mindful of our solemn duty to apply the law without fear or favor and without being swayed by public reaction to the decisions that the law mandates we reached. And in terms of the public reaction, yeah, conservatives are already freaking the fuck out right now. I'll get to some bootlicking here from Vivek Ramaswamy in a minute. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a chaotic couple of weeks here. And I say couple of weeks because they basically set a deadline of January 4th, which is the day before they're going to basically put their ballots out there, their official ballots in Colorado. So the Supreme Court now has until January 4th, just a couple of week period here, to take up this case and to make a ruling on whether or not this is going to hold or whether or not it's going to be overturned. Okay, so it's going to be a fucking wild couple of weeks here. So in terms of the public reaction, we're going to have conservatives freaking out, especially if the Supreme Court rules that this is a valid judgment here. I don't even want to begin to imagine what the conservative response or the MAGA or Trump supporting response is going to be to that. And, you know, I mean, we could end up with riots in the streets. We could end up with some assassination attempts. I don't know. You never know what's going to happen. But this is a pretty serious decision here, right? And this isn't the only state, Colorado, that's trying to do something like this. This is just the first major one that we've gotten. But now in terms of, like, what does Section 3 of the 14th Amendment actually say? Okay, in terms of the merits of what we're talking about here, aside from any politics, aside from any of that. They say here, Section 3 of the Civil War era 14th Amendment. So this was put in place after the Civil War, this section, I believe, specifically because you had people who were waging an insurrection, a war against the United States of America, the Confederacy at the time, and so you had to have a way to sort of, remove them from their office positions, right? They say no person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, who, having previously taken an oath as an officer of the United States to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to enemies thereof. So essentially what this is saying is that you are not allowed to hold any position in public office, or in the military for that matter, in the United States if you personally engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or if you even gave aid or comfort to people who engaged in an insurrection or a rebellion. So you look at that definition, what it says in the Constitution itself. You look at the ruling, and then you look at what Donald Trump did on January 6th, where he was telling people to fight like hell, we're going to march to the Capitol, all of that. You take what happened before that with the fake elector scheme, trying to send off a whole slate of completely bullshit electors to the Senate to be certified and counted, and, basically just making that up to pretend like he won states that he didn't win, even after he lost all of those court battles, the pressuring of Mike Pence on January 6th to not certify the election and go through with that process, the phone call that he made, like the one down in Georgia, in my home state, where he said, I need you to find 11,000 votes. You take all of that together, I think it's a pretty big stretch to say that Donald Trump did not at least give aid and comfort to people who were trying to do an insurrection. I think that's pretty solid there. And then you get into questions of politically, what is this going to look like, right? Is this going to just cause more chaos than there otherwise would have been? Is this going to be a bad thing in the long run if we have, half the country or a quarter of the country, whatever the most hardcore Trump supporters are, basically raising all hell as a response to this? I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I don't want to see Donald Trump be the next president. And so I'm not mad at this decision in any way, shape, or form. But, this is, again, it's going to be a fucking wild couple of weeks here. So now we get to him, Donald Trump himself here. Let's just go ahead and listen to what he said about this. He was reacting basically in real time while he was campaigning in Iowa.
Wonder crooked Joe Biden and the far left lunatics are desperate to stop us by any means necessary. They are willing to violate the U.S. Constitution at levels never seen before in order to win this election. Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. It's a threat. They're weaponizing law enforcement for high-level election interference because we're beating them so badly in the polls.
Okay, so couple of different things there. Number one, Donald Trump is beating, not only by a mile, the Republicans in the Republican primary right now. It looks like he's definitely going to be the Republican nominee for president, but he is also beating Joe Biden right now by pretty sizable margins. Some of the recent polling data that I've seen shows him beating Joe Biden in literally every single swing state. I think that has a lot more to do with the fact that Joe Biden is an awful candidate and, doesn't really deserve to win re-election based on what he's doing right now. So I think that it's more Joe Biden's weakness than Donald Trump's strength that is having him up in the polls right now. But then in terms of like the election interference stuff, I mean, on the one hand, like just definitionally, sure, you can call it election interference. I mean, you would be removing the, favorite to win the next presidential election. So in that sense, it is election interference. But also, I don't really care about that if we're talking about like what the actual merits are of what is being discussed here. Did you give aid and comfort to people who engage in an insurrection? Again, that part of it seems pretty cut and dry to me. And so, I don't think that he has a great argument there. He also, of course, adds in a little bit of flavor, saying that Joe Biden is, part of the radical left Democrats. Of course, every Republican is doing this right now. If you're to the left of Ronald Reagan's corpse, then you are a Marxist in their mind. So, of course, he's going to toss a little bit of that into there. But, listen, you can't just pretend like you didn't try to keep yourself in power. You can't just pretend like you didn't try to make yourself a little mini dictator for a little bit there, right? That you were so butthurt about the results of the 2020 election that you lost, that now you're going to pretend like none of that happened, right? You didn't make that phone call to Brad Raffensperger or whatever, the Secretary of State down in Georgia. You didn't come up with all of these fake slates of electors. You didn't lose 60 plus court cases, even some that were, from judges that you appointed yourself. You didn't, engage in January 6th and do that rally and say we're going to march in the Capitol, we need to fight like hell, all of that stuff, right? None of that happened. This all came out of nowhere. This is all just a political persecution, a witch hunt by Joe Biden. You also have on top of all of this, with this Colorado ruling and the potential Supreme Court ruling coming down the line, you also still have the Jack Smith stuff, right? You still have all of these other cases that are against Donald Trump, some of which are relating specifically to January 6th or to the election fraud, basically, that Donald Trump and his people were engaging in, okay? So you still have all of that on his back, so he could still be facing convictions, okay, from all of those other investigations. It's not even just this. It's things piling on top of one another, which is also just such an embarrassment for Democrats and for Joe Biden that this is even close. This guy is at this point like a convicted criminal, right? Or at least he, not criminally convicted, but like civilly convicted in that New York fraud case. He has like 5 different indictments, 90 plus different charges. Now the Supreme Court in one of these states is saying he's not even valid to run on the ballot because he engaged in insurrection. This is the guy, okay? Not to mention his policy record, which is also abysmal. His main achievement as the president of the United States is a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires and for corporations. This guy's an absolute disaster, and he's beating you guys in the polls right now. That is just absolutely pathetic any way you want to look at it. And another point that Ryan Grimm today on Counterpoints brought up that I thought was a good point is like, we're at the point now where we are already into this campaign season, right? The Iowa caucuses for the Republican primary, they're coming up in like a couple weeks here, right? And so we are already engaged in this, and now it becomes such a much more politically charged moment to do something like this, whether it's the indictments that he's facing or whether it's a Supreme Court ruling like this. It is a much more tense time right now. And what they should have done is just, if you're going to go after Trump and you're going to punish him for what happened on January 6th and the election fraud and all of that led up to that, if you're going to tackle that, you should have done it on day one. Literally the day after January 6th, they should have forced through some sort of an impeachment of Donald Trump, then immediately launch a DOJ investigation, and that could have been done under the Pence, administration, assuming he would have taken office. He could have passed that on to Joe Biden, whatever the case may be. That's what you should have done. You should have gone aggressively and early if you're going to do that. But then we have this long, drawn-out process, and we're leading up. We're now years after the fact. We're already in campaign season. So all of this is just going to be that much more difficult with the political atmosphere here. And so now I finish off with this. Vivek Ramaswamy, okay? You gotta calm it down with the bootlicking. All right, he's polling at like 5% right now. He knows he's not gonna win the election. I don't know what his goal is here, whether it's to just get like a podcast deal or something, or he's going to write another book or something, or he wants to be in the Trump administration. But I mean, this is just the latest in a long series of Trump bootlicking that he is engaged in. He said this: "I pledge to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary unless Trump is allowed to be on the state's ballot, and I demand that DeSantis, Chris Christie, Nikki Haley do the same immediately, or else they are endorsing this illegal maneuver, which will have disastrous consequences for the country." Okay, first off, it's not illegal. It is literally going through the legal process right now. So, I mean, anyways, this is going to be a pretty wild couple of weeks here coming up. It'll be interesting to see which way the Supreme Court ends up on this. If I had to pick a side, I would say I think they're probably going to side with Donald Trump. They're going to overturn this ruling. I mean, you have 9 members of the Supreme Court. 6 of them are conservatives. 3 of them were appointed directly by Donald Trump himself. So I find it hard to believe that they would side against him in this. If they do, then he's basically out of the contest at that point, right? Unless I'm reading the situation wrong. If the Supreme Court makes a decision that, and it can be close, you only need a couple of them to flip sides on this, right? You only need 2 of them to flip sides on this. Then, I think that just completely removes Trump from even being able to be the president. And so then what happens? I mean, again, I can't even begin to imagine that kind of a scenario playing out, but we'll have to see because, this is going to be interesting.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying